The gun was cold against Rowena's temple. She could feel the metal pressing into her skin, could hear the slight creak of the trigger as his finger rested against it. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst through her ribs. Around her, the room had gone silent. Everyone was watching, waiting, wondering if this was how her story would end. Nam Tae-hun stood behind her, his breath steady and controlled, his hand unwavering. She couldn't see his face, but she didn't need to. She'd seen those empty eyes before. Eyes that looked at people like they were numbers on a balance sheet. Eyes that had watched men die without flinching. Any last words? His voice was soft, almost gentle. It made everything worse. Rowena's throat had closed up. She wanted to beg, to plead, to scream that this wasn't fair, that she didn't deserve this. But what came out instead surprised even her. "Go to hell," someone in the room gasped. She felt, rather than saw Nam Tae-hun's slight pause, the infinitesimal moment of hesitation. Then his finger moved on the trigger, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how Rowena Williams ended up with a gun to her head in a mansion outside Seoul, you need to know where it all started. And it started 3 weeks earlier, with a phone call she should never have answered. Rowena was in her small apartment in Mapo-gu, singing along to WizKid while she cooked jollof rice, when her phone rang. She almost didn't pick up. The number was international, and international calls never brought good news. But it was Marcus's number, and Marcus was her only family left in the world. "Ro." His voice came through, crackling and distant. "How's my favorite sister? I'm your only sister, Marcus. What do you want?" She stirred the rice, phone wedged between her ear and shoulder. "Why do you always assume I want something?" "Because you always do." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Okay, fair. Listen, I'm thinking of coming to Seoul, just for a few weeks. I've got this business opportunity, and I thought, no, come on, Ro. I haven't seen you in 2 years. And whose fault is that?" She turned off the stove, giving him her full attention. "The last time you visited me, you borrowed $5,000 and disappeared for 3 months. I paid you back. Half. You paid back half. Look, I know I messed up before, but this is different. I've changed. I'm doing better, I swear. And this opportunity in Seoul, it could change everything for me." Rowena closed her eyes, already feeling herself caving. This was how it always went with Marcus. He'd mess up, disappear, then come back with promises and that little boy voice that reminded her of when they were kids in Lagos, before their parents died, before everything fell apart. "Fine," she heard herself say. 2 weeks, Marcus, that's it. Thank you. Oh my God, Ro, thank you so much. You won't regret this, I promise. But she did regret it. She regretted it the moment she saw him at Incheon Airport 3 days later, looking thinner than she remembered, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to jump out at him. She regretted it when he barely spoke during the taxi ride to her apartment, just stared out the window with that hunted look. She regretted it when he asked to borrow money on his second day there. "Just 50,000 won, Ro. I need to buy a suit for this meeting." "What meeting?" "The business thing I told you about. It's with some investors in Gangnam. I need to look professional." She gave him the money, then another 100,000 the next week. Then 200,000 after that. Each time, he promised to pay her back. Each time, the promise felt emptier. Marcus started disappearing at night, coming back at dawn smelling like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. He'd sleep all day, then leave again when the sun went down. Rowena tried to talk to him, but he always brushed her off. "Everything's fine, Ro. Stop worrying." But she couldn't stop worrying, because she knew her brother, knew the signs, the restlessness, the mood swings, the way he couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes. She'd seen it before, back when he'd gotten into poker in New York and lost his entire savings in one night. 2 weeks into his stay, Rowena came home early from the academy to find Marcus at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers covered in numbers and calculations. His hands were shaking. "Marcus, what is all this?" He jumped, quickly gathering the papers. Nothing. Just work stuff. Work stuff? She moved closer, catching a glimpse of what looked like betting slips before he shoved them into a folder. Oh my God! Tell me you're not gambling again. I'm not! Don't lie to me! She snatched the folder from his hands, opened it despite his protests. Inside were receipts from a place called the Golden Tiger Club, betting slips, credit receipts, and the numbers made her stomach drop. Marcus, this says you owe 500 million won. That's almost $500,000. It's under control. Under control? You don't even have $10,000. She threw the folder on the table. Who did you borrow from? Just some guys at the club. They're cool about it. They said I have time. What guys? Give me names. I can't. Ro, please, you don't understand. These people, they're... He stopped, his face going pale. They're what? He wouldn't meet her eyes. Connected. The word hung between them like a death sentence. Connected. In Korea, that meant organized crime. That meant the kind of people who didn't just forget debts. You borrowed money from the Korean Mafia? Rowena's voice came out as a whisper. It's not like that. It's just a private lending club. Very exclusive. They cater to high rollers. High rollers? She wanted to laugh, but nothing about this was funny. Marcus, you're a freelance graphic designer from Brooklyn. You're not a high roller. You're a gambling addict who just signed his death warrant. Stop being so dramatic. Dramatic? Do you know what these people do to people who don't pay? She was yelling now, not caring that her neighbors could probably hear. They don't send collection letters, Marcus. They send people to break your legs. I'm going to pay them back. I have a system. I've been studying the patterns, the odds. I just need one good night and I can... One good night? She stared at him in disbelief. That's what every gambler says before they lose everything. You don't believe in me. You never have. I believed in you enough to let you stay here. I believed in you enough to lend you money I knew I'd never see again. But this? She gestured at the papers. This isn't belief. This is suicide. Marcus stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm going out. Don't you dare. But he was already gone, slamming the door behind him. That was the last time Rowena saw her brother. The next morning, she woke to find his room empty, his things gone except for a single note on the pillow. I'm sorry, Ro. I'll fix this. I promise. Don't worry about me. M. She called him 17 times that day. His phone went straight to voicemail. She called the next day. Same thing. On the third day, she got a text from an unknown number. Your brother is no longer in Korea. Do not try to contact him. Fear coiled in her stomach. She wanted to believe Marcus had just run back to the States, that he'd figure things out from there. But deep down, she knew. You didn't just run from the kind of people he owed money to. They had long arms and longer memories. Still, she tried to go back to normal. She taught her classes at the academy, graded papers, made plans for the weekend. She told herself Marcus's problems were his own. She'd warned him. She'd tried to help. What happened next wasn't her fault. She believed that right up until the knock came on her door at midnight 3 days later, it wasn't a normal knock. It was the kind of knock that said, "We know you're in there and we're not leaving." Rowena froze in her bed, her heart suddenly racing. Maybe if she stayed quiet, they'd think she wasn't home. Maybe they'd leave. The knock came again, harder this time. Then a voice, calm and professional and terrifying in its politeness. Miss Williams, we know you're home. Open the door, please. This will go much easier if you cooperate. Her hands shook as she pulled on a robe. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to call the police, to climb out the window. But she was on the 4th floor, and something told her these people wouldn't be deterred by a locked door anyway. She opened it. 3 men stood in her hallway, all wearing expensive black suits that looked wrong at midnight. The one in front was tall and sharp-featured, with eyes like chips of ice. Behind him, 2 others flanked the doorway. their jackets cut in a way that couldn't quite hide the bulk of weapons underneath. "Miss Williams," the first man said, and it wasn't a question. "I am Tae-min. We need to discuss your brother's debt. He's not here." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "We're aware. That's why we're speaking with you." He pulled out a folded document from his jacket. "Your brother signed a contract with my employer. 500 million won, borrowed on March 15th. Payment was due April 15th. Today is April 18th. He is 3 days past due and has fled the country. That's his problem, not mine. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way." Taemin held out the document. "The contract clearly states that if the borrower defaults, the debt transfers to his next of kin. That would be you." Rowena took the paper with numb fingers, her eyes struggling to make sense of the Korean legal text. But she saw enough. Borrower, collateral, transfer of obligation. And there at the bottom, Marcus's signature. "This isn't legal," she said, but her voice shook. "That's a matter of perspective. In our world, contracts like this are ironclad." Taemin's expression didn't change. "You have 24 hours to produce 500 million won in cash. If you cannot, you will come with us to discuss alternative arrangements with my employer." "Alternative arrangements?" The laugh that escaped her was harsh, hysterical. "You mean you'll kill me?" "No, Miss Williams. Dead people can't pay debts. But your life as you know it will end in 24 hours. How it ends is your choice." He gave a slight bow. "We'll return tomorrow at midnight. I suggest you use the time wisely." They left her standing in the doorway, the contract crumpling in her shaking hands. The next 24 hours were a nightmare. Rowena called every friend she had in Seoul, but none had that kind of money. She went to 3 different banks begging for a loan. They all laughed. 500 million won? Without collateral? Impossible. She thought about calling her embassy, but what would she even say? "My brother gambled away $500,000 with Korean gangsters, and now they want me to pay?" In desperation, she went to the police station in her district. She showed the officer on duty the contract, explained everything. He listened, his expression growing more uncomfortable with each word. "Miss Williams, this is technically a civil debt matter. They're threatening me, but not with violence explicitly, unless you have direct evidence of physical threats. They had guns. I saw them." The officer shifted in his seat. "These organizations, they have lawyers, good ones. If we intervene without proper cause, it creates complications. File a formal report and we'll investigate, but these things take time." "I don't have time. I have," she checked her phone, 7 hours. "There's only so much we can do. I'm sorry." She left the station knowing she was alone. There was no cavalry coming, no last-minute rescue. In 7 hours, those men would return, and she had no money to give them. She went home, made herself tea, sat in her apartment surrounded by everything she'd built over 4 years in Seoul, and waited for her life to end. The knock came at midnight exactly. This time, she didn't hesitate. She opened the door before they could knock twice. Tae-min stood there with 4 men instead of 2. They looked like they were attending a funeral. "Her funeral. Miss Williams, do you have the money?" "No." He nodded, as if he'd expected this. "Then you're coming with us. And if I don't want to?" One of the men behind him shifted, his jacket falling open to reveal a gun holstered at his hip. Taemin's expression didn't change. "Then this becomes unpleasant for everyone. I would prefer to avoid that. Wouldn't you?" Rowena looked at her apartment one last time. Her books, her plants, the dashiki her mother had given her hanging on the wall. Her whole life, reduced to objects she'd never see again. "Can I bring anything?" "No, you won't need it." The ride north was silent. Rowena sat in the back of a black sedan between 2 large men who never spoke. Taemin rode in the front passenger seat, occasionally checking his phone. They drove through Seoul's glittering streets, past neighborhoods where normal people were living normal lives, and climbed into the hills where the city's wealthy hid their fortunes behind gates and walls. The estate they finally reached looked more like a fortress than a home. Traditional Korean architecture mixed with brutal modern security, guards at the gate, cameras everywhere. As they drove through, Rowena counted at least 6 armed men patrolling the grounds. The car stopped at the main entrance. Taemin opened her door. This way. Inside, the house was stunning. Art that belonged in museums, furniture that cost more than her annual salary, everything perfect and pristine and cold. They walked through hallways that seemed to go on forever until Taemin stopped at a heavy wooden door. "He's waiting for you." He knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for an answer. The man behind the desk didn't look up as she entered. He was younger than she expected, early 30s maybe, with perfectly styled black hair and a suit that probably cost more than her car. He continued reading the document in his hands, making notes with an expensive pen, completely ignoring her existence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked up. His eyes were the coldest thing Rowena had ever seen. Dark and empty, like looking into a well with no bottom. They assessed her with the same detachment someone might use to evaluate a purchase at a market. Rowena Williams. His English was perfect, barely accented. 26 years old, English teacher at Gangnam Academy. 4 years in Korea. No criminal record. No family in the country. No significant debt until 3 days ago when your brother made you responsible for his. He set down his pen. "Tell me, Miss Williams, do you know why you're here?" "Because my brother is a coward." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. It was gone too quickly to tell. "Honest. I appreciate that." He leaned back in his chair. "I am Nam Taehan. Your brother borrowed 500 million won from me. He failed to repay. Under the terms of our contract, that makes his debt yours. I didn't sign anything. No, but he did. He used you as collateral. Quite willingly, I might add." Nam Taehan's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I understand this is difficult, but in my world, debts must always be paid. Always. I don't have 500 million won. You know I don't. Of course you don't. Which is why you'll pay in other ways." He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. "You'll live here, work for me, manage my personal affairs, follow my rules. When you've provided 500 million won worth of service, you'll be free to go. And if I refuse," he stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, "then I will systematically destroy what remains of your life in Korea. Your job, your reputation, your visa. When you have nothing left, I'll make you the same offer. But next time, you'll be grateful for it." He paused. "So I'll ask you once, will you accept these terms? Or shall we do this the hard way?" Rowena's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to spit in his face. Wanted to fight, to scream, to refuse to give him the satisfaction. But she also wasn't stupid. This man held all the cards. Fighting would only make things worse. "I accept." "Good." He returned to his desk, ringing a small bell. An older woman in a traditional hanbok appeared at the door. "Mrs. Kang will show you to your room. You start work tomorrow at 8. Don't be late." "Wait. We're done here, Miss Williams. Unless you have questions about your duties?" 1,000 questions burned in her throat. How long would this take? What exactly did he expect from her? Could she contact anyone outside? But looking at his expression cold, dismissive, final, she knew he wouldn't answer. Mrs. Kang led her through endless hallways to a room at the end of the 3rd floor. She opened the door, gestured inside, and left without a word. The room was beautiful. King-sized bed with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, an attached bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people. Everything elegant and expensive and wrong. Rowena tried the door. Locked from the outside. She tried the windows. Sealed shut. She looked for her phone. Gone. Taken somewhere during the car ride. She was trapped in a palace, and the palace was a prison. She didn't sleep that night. Just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at walls that seemed to close in with each passing hour, trying to figure out how her life had gone from normal to nightmare in 72 hours. At 7 a.m., the lock clicked. Mrs. Kang entered, with a simple black dress. "You will wear this. Breakfast is at 7:30. Mr. Nam will see you at 8. She left the dress on the bed and departed, locking the door again. Rowena showered, dressed, and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. At 7:30, Mrs. Kang returned to escort her to a formal dining room where a dozen people sat at a long table. Men in suits, a few women, all of them looking at her with varying degrees of contempt or curiosity. At the head of the table sat Nam Tae-han, reading something on a tablet. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence as she sat at the far end. After breakfast, Mrs. Kang brought her to Nam Tae-han's study. He was already there, working on his computer. "Miss Williams, your duties begin today. You'll manage my personal schedule, coordinate with my business interests, and handle any tasks I assign. Mrs. Kang will train you. Questions? Can I call my work? Let them know. Already handled. You resigned. Yesterday. Family emergency. I didn't. You did. As far as the world is concerned, Rowena Williams left Seoul 3 days ago. The woman standing in front of me now belongs to me. The sooner you accept that, the better." He finally looked up. "Do you understand?" Fury surged through her, hot and bright. Before she could think, before she could stop herself, she grabbed a decorative vase from the side table and hurled it at his head. He caught it, one-handed, without standing. Without even flinching, the room went silent. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Rowena breathing hard, her heart racing. Nam Tae-han holding the vase, his expression unreadable. Then he set it down carefully on his desk. "That was foolish," he said quietly. "But I'll allow it. Once. Because you're angry, and you think defiance will make you feel powerful." He stood, walking toward her. "It won't. In my world, there are consequences for violence. Remember that." He stopped inches from her. "You'll learn obedience, Miss Williams. Everyone does eventually. The only question is how much pain you'll endure first." "I'll never obey you." Her voice shook but held firm. "Never." Something almost like respect flickered across his face. "We'll see." The days that followed blurred together. Mrs. Kang trained her on Nam Tae-han's schedule, his preferences, his non-negotiable demands. Rowena learned quickly that life in the estate ran on rigid rules. Wake at 6. Breakfast at 7:30. Work until midnight. No phone, no computer, no contact with the outside world. She was a ghost, an unperson, existing only to serve the man who owned her. But she didn't break. Every time Nam Tae-han gave an order, she obeyed with her jaw clenched and her eyes defiant. Every time he looked at her, she stared back without flinching. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. 2 weeks into her captivity, everything changed. It was late past 11 at night. Rowena had been allowed to return to her room early after a particularly exhausting day. She'd just changed for bed when she heard voices down the hall. Male voices, raised in what sounded like an argument. The smart thing would be to ignore it, mind her business, go to sleep. But Rowena had never been good at doing the smart thing. She pressed her ear to the door. The voices were coming from Nam Tae-han's office, 3 doors down. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Someone was in trouble. Slowly, carefully, she knelt by the door, peering through the crack at the bottom. From this angle, she could just barely see into the hallway. Nam Tae-han's office door stood open. Inside, a man knelt on the floor, his hands bound behind his back, his face bloody and swollen. 2 guards flanked him. And standing over him, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, was Nam Tae-han. "Please," the man was begging in Korean. "Please, I have a family. I have children. 3 children, please. You should have considered them before." "You stole from me," Nam Tae-han replied, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "It was a mistake. I'll pay it back. Every one. I swear. You had 6 months to pay it back." You chose to steal more instead. Nam Taehan crouched down, his face level with the man's. I'm not a forgiving man, Mr. Cho. When people cross me, there's only one outcome. He stood, reached behind his back, drew out a gun. Rowena's blood turned to ice. No! The man's scream echoed down the hall. No, please, God. No, I have kids. Please don't. Everyone has someone who'll miss them, Nam Taehan said quietly. That's not my concern. He raised the gun, pointed it at the man's head. His hand was steady, his expression blank, like this was nothing, like ending a life meant nothing. The man was sobbing now, begging, pleading with God and Nam Taehan in equal measure. Nam Taehan's finger moved to the trigger. Time seemed to slow. Rowena wanted to look away, wanted to run, wanted to scream, but she was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but watch. The gun pressed against the man's forehead. Nam Taehan's finger tightened. And then, the gunshot shattered the silence like a thunderclap. Rowena jerked back from the door, her hand clamped over her mouth to keep from screaming. Her whole body shook. She could still hear it, the man's final desperate plea, cut off by the sound of the gunshot. Could still see Nam Taehan's empty eyes, cold and unfeeling as he'd pulled the trigger. She scrambled to her bed, crawled under the covers, and squeezed her eyes shut. But it didn't help. Nothing helped. Because now she truly understood. The man who owned her wasn't just dangerous. He was a monster. A killer who felt nothing. Who could end a life as casually as signing a document. And she belonged to him completely. Hours passed. Maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning. Rowena lay in the darkness, listening to her own heartbeat, trying to process what she'd witnessed. Eventually, she heard footsteps in the hallway, heard her lock click, heard the door open. She didn't move, didn't open her eyes, just waited to see if she was next. But the person who entered wasn't Nam Taehan. The footsteps were lighter. A woman's footsteps. I know you're awake, a voice said in English. Female. Young. You can stop pretending. Rowena opened her eyes to find a Korean woman standing by her bed. Mid-20s, beautiful, dressed in an elegant business suit. She looked at Rowena with something that might have been sympathy. I'm Haewon, Nam Taehan's sister. She sat on the edge of the bed, uninvited. You saw what happened tonight. I can tell. Rowena didn't respond. He killed Mr. Cho, Haewon continued. The man had stolen from us. Repeatedly. After being given multiple chances, she studied her manicured nails. You think my brother is a monster now. You're probably right, but you should understand something, Miss Williams. In this world, mercy is weakness, and weakness gets, you killed. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what you're dealing with. My brother doesn't feel the way other people do. He can't. Not anymore, she stood. So whatever you're planning, escape, rebellion, hoping for rescue, forget it. The only way out is to serve your time and pray he lets you go when it's done. She walked to the door, paused. Oh, and Miss Williams? If you ever speak of what you saw tonight to anyone, my brother won't just kill you. He'll make you wish he had. Sweet dreams. The door closed. The lock clicked. Rowena lay in the darkness, Haewon's words echoing in her head, and realized with crystal clarity that she was trapped in hell. And the devil knew her name. If you want to see how Rowena survives in this nightmare, if you're ready to discover the dark secrets that made Nam Taehan into the monster he is today, then you need to smash that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell because Part 2 is dropping soon, and you do not want to miss what happens when Rowena discovers she might not be the only prisoner in that mansion. The real story is just beginning.